There's something different about the silence in Alaska. It doesn't just settle over the trees or drift through the valleys, it presses down, thick and waiting. Out there, past the last gas station and beyond the snow-blind logging roads, you'll find places that don't show up on maps. Places where the locals don't speak above a whisper. Places where missing person posters fade before the snow melts. These stories weren't pulled from ghost books or told around a fire for fun. They're real accounts, passed down by the last people brave enough to leave. Stories of voices calling from frozen lakes, of windows that frost from the inside, of footsteps echoing across floorboards in cabins that haven't been lived in for decades. Each town has a secret, and most are buried under the ice. So before we begin, remember this. Some towns vanish for a reason, and in Alaska, when the wilderness takes something, it doesn't always give it back. Let's begin with Story 1, The Lights over Kuskokwim. Story 1, The Lights on Hensley Ridge. I've never liked talking about what happened on Hensley Ridge, not because I'm scared someone won't believe me, but because deep down, I know I wasn't supposed to come back. I should have been taken that night like the others, but for some reason I wasn't. And every time I dream about it, I still wonder if I ever really left. Let me start at the beginning. I was 25 when I returned to that part of Appalachia. My father had just passed, and I'd inherited the old family cabin outside Hensley Hollow, near the Tennessee line, not far from the coal roads. I hadn't been back in over a decade. Grew up in those hills but left after high school and never looked back. The place had always made me uneasy. Something about how the trees bent too close together, or how the animals went quiet after dark. You don't notice it as a kid, but when you return as an adult, you feel it immediately. The weight of silence. Hensley Ridge is an old place. Long before there were roads, before there were names, the ridge stood like a spine of dark earth, running between the hollows. The locals call it God's fence post, though no one could tell me why. The old-timers say it's always been there watching. Some even claim the Cherokee refused to settle near it. Said the mountain was wrong, that it carried a darkness no one could bury. It was late October when I went back, just before the first frost. The cabin was more run down than I remembered. Roof sagging, porch half collapsed. The woods had crept closer over the years, like they were trying to swallow the place whole. But I needed time alone, to grieve, to clean out my father's things. So I settled in for what I thought would be a few quiet weeks. That first night I didn't sleep. The wind made the trees moan and the walls creaked like someone was walking just outside. I chalked it up to nerves and age. The next morning I walked to the edge of the property to clear my head. That's when I saw it, high up on Hensley Ridge, maybe half a mile away, a faint light glowing just past the tree line. It wasn't a star. It wasn't a headlamp or any fire I'd seen. It flickered like a candle, but too steady, and it moved, slowly, side to side, like it was searching for something. I stared at it for a long time. Then just like that, it blinked out. I asked around in town later that day. Most folks just shrugged when I brought it up, said I must have seen headlights bouncing off a rock face or some hunter out spotlighting deer. But one man, old Jacob Crowley, got real quiet when I mentioned Hensley Ridge. He leaned in and said, "Boy, them lights been up there longer than any of us. Don't go chasing what don't want to be found." Then he walked off without another word. That night I saw the light again. This time closer. It stood still, glowing between the pines like it was waiting for me. I watched it from the porch, heart thudding in my chest. I should have gone inside, locked the doors, drawn the curtains. But something about it pulled me forward. Not curiosity, not wonder. It was like it knew me, like it had always known me and I'd just forgotten until now. I stepped off the porch and walked toward it, past the tree line, across the overgrown trail that led up the base of the ridge. The light never moved, just pulsed like a heartbeat, pale and steady. As I climbed, the woods grew quiet. No crickets, no wind, no sound at all. Just the crunch of leaves under my boots and my breath, which came faster with each step. About halfway up, I lost sight of it. Just gone, like someone snuffed it out. I stopped, listened, waited, and then I heard it, a voice. Not loud, not close, but unmistakable. It said my name once. Softly, I spun around. No one there. I told myself it was the wind, even though I hadn't felt a breeze since I left the cabin. I turned back toward the trail and saw the light again, but now it was behind me. Somehow in the silence I'd gotten turned around. The light was now downhill, flickering between the trees. I started to panic. The ridge is steep but not impossible to climb. Yet in that moment, every tree looked the same. Every direction felt wrong. The light was now moving, gliding through the trees toward the base of the mountain. And the more I stared at it, the less it looked like light. It had shape. Vague at first, like someone holding a lantern. Then clearer, a tall figure cloaked in something heavy, shoulders slumped, head tilted just so. And then I saw the eyes. Not glowing, not red, just absent, hollow, like two pits in a mask. I ran. Branches slapped my face. Roots snagged my boots. But I didn't care. I could hear it behind me. Not footsteps, but the sound of something drifting. Like fabric on dead leaves, a breath that wasn't mine keeping pace. I broke through the trees near the creek and didn't stop until I reached the cabin. I slammed the door and locked it behind me. My lungs burned. My legs shook. But when I looked out the window, the woods were empty. Still. Silent. No light. That night I didn't sleep again. I sat by the window until dawn, staring out at the ridge, waiting for the sun to burn it all away. But the light came back. Every night. Always in a different place. Sometimes at the ridge. Sometimes closer. Once I saw it by the old well near the barn, just standing there, pulsing. Like it was watching, waiting. I started to lose time. I'd blink and hours would be gone. I'd find muddy footprints in the kitchen, even though I hadn't left the house. Once I woke up in the yard, barefoot with pine needles in my mouth. I started hearing voices at dusk, always just after the sun slipped behind the ridge. Not just my name anymore, others, words I didn't recognize. Appalachian dialects I hadn't heard since I was a child. Sometimes it sounded like children laughing, other times like sobbing. And once, just once, it sounded like my father. I found his old journals in the attic. Pages torn, entries frantic. He'd seen the lights too, he wrote. They come in threes. First the light, then the name, then the door. Another page, don't follow them, no matter what face they wear. And the last one, if you hear her voice, it's already too late. I tried to leave, packed a bag, got in the truck, drove toward the old road that winds down the mountain. But the road didn't end where it should have. I drove for hours, past the same dead coyote 3 times, same broken mile marker. Radio static the whole way. Then the truck just died. Battery fine, gas tank full, but it wouldn't turn over. I walked back 6 miles in the dark. The light followed me the whole way. Never closer than 50 yards. But never farther, it's been weeks. Maybe longer. I stopped checking the calendar. There's a pattern now. The light comes. The voice follows. Then I wake up somewhere I shouldn't be, with dirt on my hands or water in my boots. Last night I woke up at the edge of the ridge, standing, eyes open, arms at my sides, like I was waiting for something. And then I heard the third thing, a knock, not at the door, from under the floorboards. 3 slow knocks, then silence. I haven't gone down to the cellar since, but I hear it breathing through the cracks, and I still see the light. Every night, waiting just a little closer. Story 2. What the Creek Took. You hear stories growing up in these parts about bears, coyotes, the cold, but what they don't tell you is that sometimes the water itself changes people, not just the kind you drink, the kind that runs wild, the kind that's older than the rocks it cuts through. I lived beside one of those creeks, and if I'd left when the land started whispering, maybe I wouldn't be telling this story. Maybe I wouldn't still hear the water even when there's none around. We called it Widdershins Creek. It ran behind my grandfather's land, a narrow, winding current that sliced through shale and birch roots like a scar, fast-moving, icy year-round, even in midsummer. We weren't allowed near it as kids. That water don't run right, my granddad used to say. It's backwards, just like its name. I thought he was just being dramatic, but he wasn't the only one who warned us. Local kids said if you stood near the creek at dusk, you'd hear someone calling your name from the other side, and if you answered, you'd never make it home again. I thought it was all just old mountain talk, scare tactics to keep us from falling in, until the night my brother went missing. It was late October, about a week before Halloween. The air had turned sharp, the leaves dry and brittle. I was 16. Sam was 12. He'd always been drawn to the woods behind the house. Said the trees whispered better stories than any book. That night, just after dinner, he told me he was going out to look for a lost kitten he'd heard crying near the tree line. I told him to wait till morning. But he didn't listen. He never did. When he hadn't come back after an hour, I got worried. It wasn't like him to be gone that long. I grabbed a flashlight and headed toward the trail behind the barn. The trees were packed tight, skeletal against the moonlight, branches groaning like old bones. I kept calling his name, but the only sound was the crunch of dead leaves underfoot and the rushing of Widdershins Creek just ahead. That's when I heard it. His voice. Thin, trembling, calling from beyond the creek, "I'm here." I followed the sound, pushing through the brush until the water came into view. The creek ran fast and high that night, swollen from early frost melt. I scanned the far bank with my flashlight, squinting through the mist that clung low to the ground. But I didn't see Sam, just trees. Just fog. Then I heard him again. "Please, help me." It didn't sound right. The voice was too flat, like someone trying to be him but not quite managing the rhythm. I should have turned back. I should have run home. But instead I stepped closer to the edge of the creek and shouted, "Where are you?" And the voice responded immediately, "Right here." Only now it came from behind me. I whipped around. Nothing there. Just woods. Just that damn sound of rushing water. Then I looked back to the other side, and there he was. Sam, standing ankle-deep in the creek, clothes soaked, face pale, eyes wide. But he wasn't shivering. He wasn't blinking. He just stood there. "Sam," I screamed. "Don't move. I'm coming." But the second I stepped into the water, he vanished. Not slowly, not with a splash. Just gone. The creek surged cold around my legs, biting through my jeans like needles. I stumbled back onto the bank, breath short, eyes scanning the fog. "Sam!" I yelled again. Nothing. Just the rushing water. When I got home, I told my mother what happened. She went silent, then slapped me so hard my ears rang. She said, "We told you never to go near that water. We told you." That night, my grandfather sat me down and told me the real story behind Widdershins Creek. He said long before our family settled there, before even the settlers came through, the Shawnee told stories about the creek, said it flowed against time itself, Widdershins against the sun, against life, said something lived in the bend just north of the old sycamore grove. Not a creature, a presence. It wasn't evil, not exactly, but it wasn't of this world either. It fed on memory, on echoes. It could take the shape of what you missed the most, and it never gave anything back. The search for Sam lasted 3 days. Dogs, volunteers, state troopers, nothing, not a shoe, not a scrap of clothing. Eventually they wrote it off as an animal attack or drowning. But I knew better. I saw him. I heard him. And I knew something had taken him. Weeks passed. Then months. My parents stopped talking to each other. The grief sat heavy on the house like snow that wouldn't melt. I kept hearing his voice at night. Sometimes from the woods, sometimes from the old well. Once I heard it from the mirror. But the worst came in spring. It was a wet April. The creek had risen again. I went down to the edge, drawn by something I couldn't explain. I stood on the bank, staring into the current, and then I saw something catch on a branch just beneath the surface. A shoe. It was his. The same green sneaker he'd been wearing when he left that night. I reached for it. The second my fingers brushed it, the current changed, slowed, thickened. The water turned dark, inky like oil. And from the middle of the creek a shape began to rise. Not fast. Not violent, just wrong, like a person crawling up through liquid glass. First a hand, then a shoulder, then a head, and it was him, Sam, but not like I remembered. His eyes were empty. His skin was too smooth, too pale, and his mouth opened, not in a scream, but in a smile that never touched his eyes. He raised one hand and pointed at me. Then he mouthed something I'll never forget. "You're next." I stumbled back, fell into the mud, and when I looked again, he was gone. The creek rushed like normal. The shoe was gone too. I tried to tell my parents. My mother wouldn't even look at me. My father told me if I kept talking like that, he'd have me sent away. But I couldn't forget what I saw. And I couldn't stay in that house, not with the water whispering every night, so I left. Moved 3 states over. Started over. But I never really escaped. Even now, I don't live near water. I can't. Every time I hear a stream or a pipe running too loud, I get sick. Sometimes I still wake up drenched in creek water, sheets soaked, feet muddy with no explanation. I've set up cameras in my apartment, motion detectors, but nothing ever shows. And every spring, on the day Sam vanished, I get a call from an unknown number. I've answered a few times. There's never a voice, just rushing water, and sometimes a faint echo of my name. I think whatever took him got a piece of me too. I think it marked me that night. And it's just waiting for the right time. Waiting for me to come back to the creek because sometimes in my dreams I see him. Standing in the middle of Wittershan's Creek, holding out his hand, still smiling that hollow smile, and I know, deep down, that one day I won't be able to stop myself from taking it. And when I do, I don't think I'll come back either. Not really. Story 3. The cabin that moves. People think of cabins as places of peace, getaways, quiet retreats in the woods. But the one I stayed in wasn't like that. It didn't give you peace. It took it, and it moved. Not in the way buildings creak and settle. I mean, the cabin moved. It was never in the same place twice. This happened back in the summer of 2004, when I took a job with the Forestry Service in McDowell County, way out in the southern stretch of the Appalachians. My job was basic trail inspection. Spend 2 weeks at a time clearing brush, marking danger zones, making sure the path stayed safe. We rotated between trailheads and ranger shacks. One of those rotations sent me up to Fog Bear Hollow. I'd never heard of Fog Bear. No locals lived up there anymore, and it wasn't on any of the regular maps. One of the older rangers, a guy named Bill Withers, gave me a strange look when I asked for the key to the cabin. "You sure you want that one?" He asked. "Isn't it standard issue?" I replied, trying to sound braver than I felt. He shrugged. "Just don't go looking for it after dark. Let it come to you." I thought he was messing with me. The next day I loaded my gear, drove 3 hours down gravel switchbacks, and then hiked the last half-mile into the woods. The air changed as soon as I entered the tree line. It went still, unnaturally still. No birds, no wind. Just the crunch of my boots and the occasional drip of water from the canopy. It took me longer than it should have to find the cabin. According to the coordinates, it should have been just off the trailhead, a few hundred yards in, but when I reached the spot, there was nothing. Just trees and undergrowth. I circled the area for nearly an hour, starting to get frustrated, thinking maybe I had the wrong info. Then I turned around and there it was, the cabin. Just there behind me. I swear to you, I looked at that exact spot 10 minutes earlier, and there was nothing. But now it stood between 2 massive hemlocks, small, 1-room, dark wood, metal roof rusting at the edges. No path leading up to it, no footprints, just sitting like it had grown out of the earth itself. Still, I figured my eyes had played tricks on me. The door creaked as I opened it, but inside everything looked normal enough. Old bed frame, wood stove, storage cabinet, single lantern on a hook. The windows were narrow and high, letting in only slivers of light. I unpacked, ate a cold dinner, and turned in early. That night, the wind came, not outside, inside. I woke to the sound of it whispering through the cracks in the wood, sharp and wet, like someone sucking air through broken teeth. The lantern flickered even though it was turned off. I sat up, heart pounding, and noticed something strange. The windows. They were now facing a different direction. I was sure the view when I arrived had shown the trees sloping downhill. Now they sloped up. The moss on the trees was reversed. The terrain was flipped. I stepped outside and froze. This was not the same place. The forest was denser. The trees packed tighter. The air thicker, smelling of rot and old soil. And worst of all, there were no trail markers. No signs I had ever been here before. I walked in circles for hours that morning. My compass spun slowly, refusing to settle. My GPS wouldn't load. I eventually found the cabin again, but from a different angle. Its front door now faced a split rock formation I hadn't seen the night before. I radioed into the station. Static. I was stuck. By the third night, I'd stopped trying to make sense of it. I just stayed inside, lit the lantern, and waited for morning. That's when the knocking started, just before midnight. 3 hard knocks on the door. I nearly jumped out of my skin. I grabbed my flashlight, crept to the door, and called out. No answer. I opened it slowly, expecting maybe an animal had bumped it, but there was nothing out there. The trees stood still, unmoving. No wind, no rain, no sound. Then I saw the prints, barefoot. Human, in the mud, leading from the woods to the steps, but no return prints. Whoever or whatever it was still out there. I stayed up the rest of the night, watching the windows, listening for movement. I kept the lantern lit until dawn. When the sun came up, I stepped outside and looked again. The prints were gone, erased, like they'd never been there. That morning, I noticed something else. The cabin had moved again. The terrain sloped differently. The moss on the trees was gone, and the air smelled sweet like honeysuckle and fresh bark. The same structure, same interior, but a different place entirely. I stopped sleeping after that. I tried carving an X into a tree outside the front door. When I woke the next morning, the X was gone, and the cabin faced an open clearing full of blackened stumps. No birds, no wind. And then the whispers started. Not just the wind anymore, real whispers, inside the walls. Beneath the floorboards, sometimes calling my name, sometimes asking things I didn't understand. Do you remember? And you left us here and let us in. I started losing time. I'd wake up standing in the doorway with my hand on the knob. Once I woke in the woods, no shoes, bleeding from a scratch I couldn't explain. I saw things too. People, I think, just outside the cabin at night. Faces pressed to the glass, watching, not moving. Eyes wide and black, no mouths. Just skin pulled too tight. They'd vanish when I turned on the lantern. The final night was the worst. I decided I had to leave no matter what. I packed my things before dark, left the lantern off, waited for the first sign of moonlight and bolted into the woods. I walked for what felt like hours. The woods didn't change. Same trees, same stumps, same fog. Eventually, I found a clearing with a fire pit. Cold ashes, bits of bone, and then I saw it. The cabin, right in front of me. Waiting, its door wide open. No lights, no sound. It had moved ahead of me. It knew where I was going. I lost it then. I screamed, threw rocks at it, pounded on the trees. But no one came. No answer, no help. Only the sound of something moving inside. Slow footsteps. Heavy. Deliberate. But no one ever came to the door. I didn't sleep that night. I huddled in the brush until morning, and when the sun rose, the cabin was gone. I stumbled downhill, half crazed, and eventually found a trailhead I didn't recognize. 2 days later, I made it back to the ranger station. When I told Bill what happened, he just nodded like he already knew. It doesn't move on its own, he said. It moves with you. I quit that job a week later, and I haven't gone back to the mountains since, but I still dream about that cabin. In those dreams, I'm walking toward it, unable to stop. I open the door, and inside there's no furniture. Just mirrors. Endless mirrors showing versions of myself I don't recognize. Some with hollow eyes, some screaming silently, some smiling far too wide. The last thing I always see in the dream is the door closing behind me, by itself. And then I wake up to knocking on my bedroom wall, always 3 times, always just before midnight. Story 4, my grandfather's grave was empty. There are certain things you never question growing up in a mountain family, things buried deep in tradition, silence and a kind of fear people don't put into words. You inherit stories like old tools, rusted, handed down, heavy with use. But some stories you don't hear until it's too late. That was the case with my grandfather, and with what we found in his grave. He passed in the spring of 1997 up in McCreary County. He'd been the kind of man who didn't speak unless it was necessary, who woke before dawn and never turned his back to the tree line. He never left the hollow, not once. And for as long as I can remember, he ended every night by walking the boundary of our land with a lantern in one hand and a bone-handled knife in the other. As a child, I thought it was just habit. Now I know better. We buried him on the ridge behind the family house next to his father and his father before him. Small plot, fenced with iron, shaded by twisted cedar and wild plum. I remember the day clearly. Sky too bright, air too still. The preacher lost his place in the Bible twice, which made some of the older folks mutter. My grandmother refused to look at the coffin. She just stared into the woods behind the hill, eyes glassy like she was waiting for something to step out. After the burial, life moved on the way it always does in the mountains. Slow, quiet. People left casseroles on the porch. We burned sage in the house, and for a while the nights felt still. Then the lantern started swinging again. It was maybe 3 weeks after the funeral when I saw it. A light bobbing along the ridge path exactly where my grandfather used to walk. Pale, steady, no sound, just drifting from one end of the property line to the other. I told myself it was just wind catching a branch or a trick of moonlight, but it came back the next night. And the night after that, Always at the same time, 11:34 p.m. Not 11:30, not 11:35, every night the same. I mentioned it to my grandmother. She didn't act surprised, just turned slowly from the window and said, "He's not where he's supposed to be." At first I thought she meant spiritually. I figured maybe she was grieving in her own way, but then she said something that chilled me. I told them not to bury him in that ground. It don't hold. I didn't press her. I didn't want to. But a few days later I got curious. Foolish. I went up to the grave myself just after sunset. The air was wrong. Not cold exactly, but brittle, like it might crack if I breathed too hard. The trees were quiet, not silent, listening. I stood by the grave and felt something deep in my gut shift, like a fish turning in dark water. That's when I noticed the dirt. It had sunken, just slightly, but more than it should have after 3 weeks. I crouched down and pressed my hand to the soil, cold, damp, loose. And I swear, I mean this, I felt warmth underneath. Not heat, warmth, like breath. I told my uncle the next morning. He'd been close to my grandfather, closer than my own father had been. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he nodded slowly, then said, "If he's walking, we need to make sure he's still where we left him." That evening, we went back to the plot. Just the two of us, shovels in hand. We dug quietly, the way you do when words feel too heavy. The soil gave easily, too easily. Not a single stone or root, just soft earth like someone had stirred it recently. It didn't take long. When the blade of my shovel struck the wood, my stomach dropped. We cleared the rest with our hands, not wanting to damage the box. The lid was intact, no signs of rot or tampering. But when we pried it open, there was nothing inside. Empty, no body, no clothes, no decay, just old air and a faint scent of cedar. My uncle sat back hard on the ground. I remember his hands shaking, dirty fingers gripping his knees. Then he said something I'll never forget. "They came for him." I asked who. He just shook his head and said, "They always come back for what was theirs." We covered the grave, packed the earth tight, and swore not to tell anyone. My grandmother knew the truth anyway. She didn't say a word when we returned, just looked at us with eyes that had already seen too much. That night, the lantern didn't swing, but the next night, it was back, closer this time. Right along the back fence, I started hearing things too. Footsteps on the porch that never led to a knock. The sound of the front door creaking open, though it never moved. And voices, low, guttural, speaking in a language I didn't know. My dreams grew heavy, thick. I'd wake up breathless, convinced someone had been standing at the foot of my bed. Then the animals started disappearing. First it was the barn cat. Then 2 of our goats. No blood, no tracks. Just gone. One morning I found a pile of feathers in the shape of a man's shadow in the chicken yard. In the center of it, my grandfather's knife. The bone handle cracked down the middle. I don't know what he did in his life, what bargains he made, or who he made them with. But I believe now that the ground rejected him. That whatever walked in that lantern light wasn't him anymore. The final night I spent in that house, I woke to the smell of smoke. Not fire, ashes. Old, cold, like something had been burned and buried, but the scent remained. I got up and walked to the window. The lantern was back, but this time it wasn't alone. I saw a figure, tall, shoulders too wide, legs too long, walking beside the light. It didn't carry the lantern. The lantern floated. It bobbed and weaved like it was being pulled on a string. The figure didn't look human. Its arms hung low, its head tilted in unnatural angles, and as it passed the fence, it stopped. It turned to face the house, and the lantern died, just blinked out. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I grabbed what I could and left. Haven't been back since. The family sold the land the following year. I hear it's still empty. No one's moved in. But sometimes on cold spring nights I dream of that grave. I see the lid cracking open from the inside. I hear the hiss of old breath escaping into the air. And I hear him, my grandfather, whispering from the trees, saying something over and over in a voice that is almost his. Let me back in. And every time I wake, my bedroom window is open. Even when I know I locked it. Story 5. The Woman in the Laurel Thicket. There's a place near where I grew up that we were taught not to go, not even in daylight. It was just a half-mile off the old fire road, tucked behind a series of switchbacks and stone breaks where the trees grow tight and the air grows still. Folks called it the thicket like it had a capital T, and everyone knew what that meant. You didn't walk into the laurel there. You didn't cut it. You didn't even speak of what you might have seen beneath it. But when I was 19, I did what most people do with old warnings. I ignored them. It started when I took a job doing brush clearing for the county. Cheap labor. Hot work, but it paid. The crew I was assigned to covered the back hollers along the ridge, places where trails had long been overtaken by bramble, forgotten by most maps. On our third day, we hit a patch of dense growth I'd never seen before. Massive rhododendron and mountain laurel, thick and twisted, forming what looked like a wall of tangled green. You could barely see through it, and the light barely touched the ground. Our team leader, a man named Harris, squinted at the area and shook his head. "We ain't touching that," he muttered. "We'll go around." When one of the guys asked why, he just said, "Old ground. Let it rot." That night I asked my grandmother about it. She'd lived in these parts all her life and knew every story the hills could tell. When I mentioned the laurel patch off the old fire road, her eyes darkened. "You saw her thicket," she whispered. "That's her place." I asked who she meant. Her answer chilled me. "The woman in the laurel. She watches for the ones who forget." When I laughed, she didn't. She grabbed my hand, knuckles tight. They used to say she was once human. Long time ago. But grief can rot a soul, child. Turn it inside out. She lost someone in those woods, and she's been waiting ever since. For a face that looks familiar. Or a voice that sounds kind. I wish I'd listened to her. I really do. But the thing about warnings is, they feel like dares when you're young and bored. So the next morning I went back. Told the crew I'd left a tool behind near the switchback. Truth was, I just wanted to see what was inside the thicket. I figured it would make a good story. Maybe a chance to prove that all the old talk was just backwoods superstition. The laurel was thicker than I remembered. The branches twisted like ribs. The leaves dry even though it had rained the night before. I pushed through, breaking off small pieces as I went. They snapped too easily. Inside, the temperature dropped. Not just shade cool, underground cold. My breath came in clouds. And there was a smell. Earth, mold, and something else. Something sweet and wrong. Like rotten honey. That's when I saw her. Just a flicker at first, white fabric between the bushes about 20 feet ahead. I called out, no answer. I pushed forward faster now, my curiosity starting to curl into something sharper, something like dread. She stood in the center of a small clearing, barefoot, pale and still. Her dress hung in tatters, but clean, too clean for someone standing in the dirt. Her hair was long, dark, wet like it had just come out of the creek. She didn't look up. Just stood there, head tilted slightly like she was listening to something under the soil. I should have turned around. But I stepped closer, and that's when her head jerked. Fast, sudden, and she looked right at me. Her eyes were black, not shadowed, not glazed, just black like they were made of the thicket itself. And her mouth didn't open, but I heard her voice plain as day in my skull. "You don't belong here." My knees gave out. I stumbled back, caught in the branches, scratching my arms and face. The roots shifted underfoot like something was moving beneath them. I tried to speak, but no sound came out. Only a buzzing filled my ears like 1,000 bees behind my eyes, and then she vanished. Just gone. No rustle, no step, nothing. But the clearing remained. Open. Impossibly still, with every leaf frozen in place. I scrambled out the way I came. Branches clawing at my clothes, and didn't stop until I reached the road. My arms were bleeding. My boots soaked. The others said I looked pale, glassy-eyed. I told them I'd seen a bear. They didn't press. But that night I couldn't sleep. Because when I closed my eyes, I saw her. Standing at the foot of my bed, unmoving, staring. And around her neck, strung like a garland, were the faces of men, dried and twisted like pressed flowers. When I woke, the window was open. The smell of laurel filled the room. I tried to stay away. I avoided the road. But she followed. At first, it was small things. Wilted leaves on my pillow, dirt in my shoes, branches laid across my doorstep in strange spiral patterns. But then it got worse. I started hearing whispers in the trees. My name, said slowly, like someone tasting it. Lights flickered when I passed mirrors. My reflection began to lag, smiling just a second too late. And once I swear I saw her behind me in the mirror, just her hands on my shoulders before I turned and found no one there. My grandmother tried to help. She burned cedar, scattered salt, spoke words I didn't understand. But it didn't stop. She told me, "You broke the border. You made eye contact. You let her see you. And once she's seen you, she remembers." The final time I saw her was in my backyard. It was just before dawn. Mist hung low over the grass and the birds hadn't started yet. I looked out my window and saw her, standing at the edge of the tree line, motionless, head tilted, hands hanging too long by her sides. And then she moved. Not walked. Shifted. Like she'd been yanked forward by invisible strings, closer, closer. Every blink brought her nearer without motion. I slammed the blinds. I packed that same day and left the county. I haven't been back, but the dreams haven't stopped. She appears in different places now, a parking lot, a stairwell, an empty elevator, but always watching. Never closer, never farther, just waiting. And every time she whispers the same thing just before I wake up. "Bring me someone else, and I'll let you go. I haven't told anyone." But lately, I've been catching myself watching strangers, looking for someone who won't be missed, someone I could take back to the thicket. Story 6. They whisper in numbers. I used to think the worst kind of fear was seeing something that shouldn't be there, something unnatural, something wrong. But I've learned that's not true. The worst fear, the one that rots you from the inside, is hearing something that shouldn't be possible. Not just once, but over and over again until your own mind doesn't feel like it belongs to you anymore. That's what happened to me up on Campion Ridge. And it started with a whisper, not a scream, not a growl, just a whisper. Quiet, precise, and always in numbers. It was the summer of 2013, and I'd just moved into my uncle's old place after he passed. A crooked, one-story home built near the edge of the ridge, half buried in dogwoods and honeysuckle. The land was cheap, and I was in no place to be picky. I told myself it would be peaceful, a chance to regroup. But something in those woods had been waiting. The first whisper came on my third night. I was lying in bed, windows open, letting the mountain air settle in. That's when I heard it, right outside my bedroom window. A whisper so soft I barely noticed it at first. It said 3, just that, one word, one number. I sat up, listened. Nothing, no footsteps, no rustle of leaves, just the gentle chirp of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. I chalked it up to a dream. Maybe a bird, maybe a trick of wind. The next night it came again, same time, same voice. 3, but this time it was followed by another, slightly louder, 5, and then silence. Now, I'm not one to scare easily. I've spent nights alone in cabins, fished in creeks known for drownings, even hunted in hollers where folks said the trees moved. But there was something off about this, something that settled under my skin like a splinter. On the 4th night, the whispers returned, but not outside, inside, right by my bed. 3, 5, 7. The cadence was exact, crisp, like someone reading from a list. The voice was neither male nor female, just cold, flat, like a machine trying to mimic humanity. I turned on every light in the house, searched every room, checked the locks, nothing, no signs of entry, just silence. I didn't sleep that night, and I didn't sleep much after that. By the end of the week, the numbers had started to change. 4, 14, 72. Always whispered just after midnight, always in a set of 3. The pattern didn't make sense. I started writing them down. Thought maybe it was some kind of code, coordinates, or old frequencies, but nothing matched. I even checked my uncle's belongings, boxes of old maps, war medals, a disassembled shortwave radio, but there was no clue, no explanation. Then I found the notebook, tucked inside the closet behind the water heater, wrapped in flannel, yellowed pages filled corner to corner with numbers. Hundreds of them, thousands even, each set dated, each one recorded carefully. And at the bottom of the final page in my uncle's handwriting were 3 words. Don't say them. I felt sick. I sat there staring at those pages, heart pounding. He'd heard them too, maybe for years. I wondered if it had driven him mad. He hadn't died of any illness. The death certificate said natural causes, but there were no witnesses. No autopsy. The next night I stayed up with a voice recorder and a loaded .38. When the whispers came, I was ready. 6, 66, 11. Clear as day. But when I played back the recording, the only thing I heard was static. No numbers. No whispers. Just white noise, low and aggressive like wind rushing through a pipe. That was the first night I saw them. Just outside the tree line. 3 shapes, tall, too thin, skin the color of fog. Not moving. Not even swaying. Just there, watching. They vanished the second I stepped outside. I should have left. I should have packed a bag, burned the house down, and never looked back. But I didn't. Because the whispers were changing, they started repeating over and over, louder, faster. 6, 66, 11, 6, 66, 11, until I couldn't sleep. Couldn't eat. Couldn't think. I saw the numbers in my dreams, waking visions. Once I looked into the bathroom mirror and my reflection whispered them back to me. My lips didn't move, but his did. The worst was the night I answered. I was breaking down. Tired, delirious. I'd been awake for nearly 3 days. When the whispers came again, I shouted, "What do you want?" And the voice paused. Then calmly it said, 4. I laughed, short and dry, but then it said, "You." The lights went out, all of them. No wind, no thunder. Just darkness and the echo of that single word, "You," still ringing in my ears. I sat on the floor with my back to the door, holding the gun in my lap. But nothing came. No footsteps. No breaking glass, only the numbers. And then I realized something terrifying. They weren't random. They were counting down. The next night, 3, 5, 1, then 2, 4, 0. I held my breath. Waited for something, anything. But all I heard was silence. I stayed frozen until dawn. And then I left. Just walked out the front door, got in my truck, and drove until the trees thinned out and the mountains were behind me. I didn't bring clothes. Didn't bring my phone. Just drove. That was 10 years ago. Since then, the whispers have followed me. Not every night, but enough. Enough to remind me that whatever I heard on that ridge wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't grief. And it wasn't my imagination. They whisper less now, but always in sets of 3. Always at midnight. Always numbers. And once a year, the countdown starts again. Sometimes I try to ignore it. Sometimes I don't make it to 0. But one day I know I won't be fast enough. Or far enough. One day I'll make a mistake. I'll answer when I shouldn't. Or say a number I'm not supposed to say. And that will be it. Because the voice was right. The last number wasn't a warning, it was a promise, and when I hear 0 again, I don't think anything will be left of me. Except the numbers I've started whispering to myself. Story 7. The Trail That Loops Forever. If you hike long enough in the Appalachians, you start to hear stories, not from tourists but from locals, real hikers, rangers, people who've lived up in these hills their whole lives. They tell you to stay on marked trails, always carry a compass, and if your path starts to feel too quiet, stop and turn back. They don't always explain why. They don't need to. Because the mountain doesn't care if you're experienced or brave. It just waits. And sometimes it watches. The trail that broke me is called Long Pine Loop. That's the name printed on the signpost nailed into a mossy tree near a pull-off on Route 9. You won't find it on official maps. It's not maintained anymore. I found it through word of mouth, passed along from a friend of a friend who said it was old but scenic. They weren't lying about the view. But what they didn't say, what no one says out loud, is that once you step onto that path, the mountain decides whether you're coming back. It was early fall when I went, just past the peak of leaf season. The air turning sharp, the colors shifting from bright golds to rust reds. I'd just gone through a breakup, needed to clear my head, so I packed light, drove up before dawn, and parked at the old gravel pull-off. The trailhead looked ordinary, a weathered wooden sign, some overgrown ferns, a little stack of cairns at the edge where hikers had passed before. I stepped through without hesitation. The first hour was peaceful. The trail wound through maples and white pine, soft underfoot with fallen needles and leaves. I saw a deer at one point, heard water off to the right. I didn't even check my compass. It felt good, familiar. Then things started to shift, not all at once. Just little things. The trees got denser. The light changed. Shadows stretched too long for the time of day. I started hearing footsteps that weren't mine. Soft, steady, always just behind me. I'd stop. The sound would stop. I'd turn around. Nothing. At first I thought maybe it was an animal following at a distance, but then I began seeing signs, literally. The same tree with the mossy knot. The same downed log across the trail. The same broken signpost that read loop in faded paint. I was looping. At first I thought I'd just circled back accidentally. Trails double back all the time. I checked my watch. 2 hours had passed. I kept going. But the trail didn't end. And the forest wouldn't change. Everything repeated. The same branch across the path. The same pile of stones. The same cluster of mushrooms that looked like they'd been dusted with ash. Even the light felt identical, like the sun hadn't moved an inch in hours. I tried turning back, but the trail behind me led to the same thing. Another loop. Panic began to set in. I checked my phone, no signal. I pulled out my compass. The needle spun, twitching like it was nervous. Useless. The air felt thick now, like I was breathing through cloth, and beneath the wind in the trees I heard something new. Voices. Not words, just whispers. Like a conversation behind a door you can't open, I shouted. I ran, I screamed for help. But every time I broke into a clearing, I found myself right back where I started, standing in front of that broken signpost. The sun never moved. I lost track of how many times I passed that same tree with the knot in its bark. I stopped counting after 7. At some point I tried to leave the trail entirely. I broke left through the underbrush, using the slope of the land to guide me. The forest fought back. Brambles tore at my clothes, branches clawed my arms, roots twisted underfoot. After an hour of crawling, pushing, and sweating, I stumbled into a clearing, and there was the trail right in front of me, waiting. But something had changed. The signpost was gone. In its place stood a cairn of bones, animal and human, stacked neatly like a marker. At the top was a skull, its eye sockets filled with dead leaves. The air buzzed. My skin prickled. I turned around and saw myself standing 20 feet away. Same jacket, same backpack, same terrified expression, just staring. Then it was gone, not walked away. Gone, like a blink. I don't remember getting back on the trail. I just remember walking, always walking, hoping that if I just kept moving, something would break the loop, but it never did. Not until I heard him, a voice clear as day, from behind a split oak. Don't look at it. I stopped cold. The voice was calm, male, older, familiar. I stepped forward, slowly, and saw a man sitting on the ground, knees pulled to his chest. His beard was wild, his eyes sunken, clothes torn. He looked like he'd been out there for years. "You've been here a while," he said without looking at me. "You just don't know it yet." I tried to speak, but my throat was dry. He pointed back toward the trail and said it again. "Don't look at it. Just walk, no matter what you hear, no matter what you see." I asked him how to get out. He just smiled, sad and distant. "You don't, not really. But if it lets you think you got out, take that gift and run." Then he vanished, just like my reflection in the clearing. Just like everything else that didn't make sense, I walked. I don't know how long. My legs ached. My mind cracked. At some point, I stopped trying to make sense of the sun, of time. I just walked, and then, without warning, I stepped out of the trees and saw my car, just sitting there. Same gravel, same air, but the leaves had changed. They were brighter, fresher. It felt like spring. My watch was dead. My phone wouldn't power on, but I was too exhausted to care. I got in the car, turned the ignition, and drove. I didn't stop until I saw another human being. When I got home, I looked at a calendar. I had been gone 3 days. Not hours, 3 full days. Since then, I haven't hiked again. I haven't left pavement. I sleep with the lights on. I don't even walk to the mailbox after dark, because sometimes, in the middle of the night, I hear footsteps circling the house and I know what they are. They're the same ones I heard behind me on the trail, and they're still looping. And sometimes, I wonder if I ever really left, or if the trail just let me go long enough to bring someone else back in. Story 8, The Children of Bone Hollow. When I was a boy, Bone Hollow was just a name whispered on porches and muttered over fence posts, the kind of place adults used to threaten us with when we got too close to the tree line. "Keep fooling around in them woods and the Bone Hollow children will come for you," they'd say, their voices half joking but their eyes not. I thought it was just another mountain ghost story, like blood moons and coal camp curses. until I found the old shoe. I was maybe 11 when it happened. My cousin Eli and I had snuck out of my grandmother's house after supper, flashlights in hand, looking for raccoons down by the creek. We crossed the field, passed through the line of black walnut trees, and crept past the rusted gate that led into the hollow, the place no one talked about in daylight. We weren't scared then. Not really. Just stupid. Bone Hollow doesn't announce itself. There's no sign. No landmark. Just a hush in the trees and a slope that dips too fast like the land's trying to swallow you whole. The air changes when you cross into it, goes damp and heavy like old breath. Even the birds won't sing. Just the sound of trickling water and wind that doesn't move anything. We didn't get far. Maybe 50 yards in. Eli spotted it. A single child's shoe, old and rotted, half buried in moss beneath a cedar tree. We stared at it, then at each other. Something about the way it was placed. Like someone had tucked it there, deliberately, made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I picked it up. That's when the whispering started. Low at first, circular, a mix of laughter and humming, like a schoolyard game being played just out of sight. We froze. Then Eli pointed, trembling. Figures in the trees. Small, watching. Children, maybe half a dozen of them, standing just beyond the reach of our flashlights. Their clothes were tattered, hanging off narrow shoulders. Their skin was pale, gray, like stone smoothed by creek water. They didn't move. Didn't blink, just stared. I dropped the shoe, and the whispering stopped. Then they smiled, all at once. Not joyful smiles. Not childlike. These were wide, thin-lipped, stretched too far across their faces. Smiles like masks. Smiles that knew something we didn't. Eli grabbed my arm and we ran. Didn't stop until we were back in the yard, gasping like we'd outrun a bear. We didn't tell anyone, not because we were brave, but because we couldn't. The words wouldn't come out right. Even now, it feels like I'm dragging this story out of something that doesn't want it told. We tried to forget. Childhood has a way of burying things that don't make sense, but Bone Hollow didn't forget us. The next week, Eli stopped talking. Not like moody silence. I mean nothing. Just shut down. Wouldn't eat. Wouldn't sleep. Just sat on the porch and stared toward the tree line, like he was waiting for someone, or something. My aunt sent him to a doctor, then a priest. Nothing helped. Then one morning he was gone. No sign of a break-in. No footprints. Just his bedroom window open and muddy prints on the floor. Child-sized bare feet. The kind that had no toes. Just smooth, rounded edges like hooves made of skin. We searched the woods. For days. No sign. That's when my grandmother told me the truth. Said Bone Hollow had always been fed. That once a generation, it took children from the surrounding ridges. Not many, just enough to be forgotten. Just enough to keep folks scared but quiet. Most families blamed drownings, accidents, but some knew better. And those families didn't speak of it. Ever. She said when her sister disappeared in 1942, the search ended after 2 days. Not because they gave up, because they knew where she'd gone. Knew who'd taken her. And knew nothing could be done once the Hollow called your name. But what are they? I asked her. She looked out the window, eyes distant. Children, she whispered. But not like you. Not anymore. Hollows got their bones, but it didn't keep their souls right. After Eli vanished, I moved away. Couldn't stand the woods anymore. Couldn't sleep without seeing those stone-colored faces watching me from the trees. I stayed gone for over 20 years. Built a life. Had a family. Thought I'd outrun it. Then my own son disappeared. We were visiting my mother, his grandmother, up on the mountain. He was 7, full of curiosity. Just like me. He wandered off during the afternoon. I didn't even notice at first. I thought he was in the barn, or down by the creek. But as the sun started to dip, something in my chest turned cold. I knew. I ran straight to the edge of the yard. The wind had picked up, but nothing moved. No birds, no crickets, just stillness. Then I saw it, a small moss-covered shoe, tucked under the same cedar tree where I'd found one decades earlier. My legs buckled. I called his name until my throat tore. No answer. I searched for hours. Flashlight shaking in my hand, calling, crying, begging. I found nothing. Not even a footprint. Just that awful hush between the trees, and the sense that something young and ancient was watching me suffer. I knew then what the Hollow wanted. It doesn't just take, it keeps. fills itself with the echoes of children it collects, preserves their laughter, their memories, but twists them into something that no longer fits in this world. I still see him sometimes, in dreams, standing just beyond reach, barefoot and pale, mouth slightly open like he's trying to say something, and always that same crooked smile across his face, not quite his, something else behind it. I tried to go back once, just to be sure. Hired a guide, carried salt, sage, even old warding charms my grandmother once buried in the garden. We never found the entrance. The hollow moves now, hides itself like a wound healing over. But the land remembers, and so do I. Because even now, late at night, I hear them, children laughing, singing lullabies that don't belong to any time or place. And sometimes, if I listen close, I hear his voice among them, calling out, not for help, but for me, and I know deep down that one day I'll follow it, just to see his face one last time. Even if it means never coming back. Story 9. Under the mountain, it waits. They say the mountain keeps what it's owed. When I was a boy, I believed that meant people got lost in caves or mines and were never found again. A warning for careless hikers or reckless teenagers. But now I understand. The mountain doesn't just keep people. It consumes them. And beneath its skin, under the layers of rock and time, something waits. My family's lived near Boone's Pass for generations. The land there is steep and cruel, cliffs that drop without warning, creeks that vanish into sinkholes, hollows that never see sun. But the worst of it is Harker's Peak, a jagged, lopsided thing with an abandoned mine shaft near its base. Everyone knew not to go near it. The old signs were rusted and falling, but the message was clear. Keep out, do not enter, structurally unsound. But it wasn't the risk of collapse that kept people away. It was the humming. I remember hearing it as a child when the wind was just right. A low vibration, like something vast shifting beneath the ground. My father said it was just the earth settling, old tunnels breathing. But my grandfather, he never spoke when it came. He'd just sit on the porch, fingers tight on the armrests, eyes locked on the ridge. One summer, when I was 14, the sound changed. It didn't come with the wind anymore. It came at night, late, when everything else was still. And it wasn't just a hum, it was a heartbeat. Slow, measured, like something alive beneath the mountain, asleep but dreaming. That was the summer animals started disappearing. First our hound bear, then 3 goats, then a calf from a neighbor's pasture. No tracks, no blood, just vanished. My grandfather started leaving salt lines around the barn. My father rolled his eyes, then my uncle, Ray, went missing. He'd gone up to the ridge to hunt like he did every other weekend. But he didn't come back. Search teams found his truck by the trailhead, keys still in the ignition. They combed the woods for days. Nothing. Just an old silver compass they found half buried near the mine entrance. We buried an empty box the next week. After that, things got worse. The humming grew louder, deeper. It vibrated the windows some nights, set the nails in the porch boards shivering. My grandfather started muttering in his sleep, words I didn't recognize, strange syllables that didn't sound like any language I knew. Then, one night I followed him. I heard the front door creak just after midnight. Saw his shadow slip into the tree line with a lantern and a rope slung over his shoulder. I trailed behind, careful, quiet, heart pounding. He didn't go up the ridge. He went into it, toward the mine. When I reached the clearing, he was standing at the entrance. The boards had been ripped down. The air pouring out of that dark hole was thick and warm, like breath. He didn't go inside. Just stood there, whispering something I couldn't hear, and then he dropped the rope into the mine like he was offering it something. And the mountain whispered back. I can't explain it, not exactly. It wasn't a voice. It was more like a thought that wasn't mine, pressed into my skull, something vast and old, pushing against the edge of what my mind could hold. I stumbled and my boot snapped a twig. He turned around fast. I'll never forget the look on his face, part fear, part relief. You weren't supposed to come, he said. Not yet. He walked me home in silence. Didn't explain. Just said, the mountain's waking up. It's hungry, but it remembers blood. It remembers sacrifice. He died a week later, collapsed in the fields with no warning. His heart just stopped. We buried him next to Uncle Ray's empty box. The night after the funeral, I dreamt I was inside the mine. The walls pulsed like lungs. The ceiling dripped black water. And at the far end of the tunnel, something was breathing slow and deep, like the whole mountain inhaled and exhaled through one enormous mouth. I woke up shaking, sweat drenched, the humming still in my ears. I tried to forget. Moved away. Got married. Had kids, but the mountain doesn't forget you. Last year I got a call. My father had gone missing. They found his truck at the same trailhead. I knew before they said it. The mine. I returned to the old house, now barely standing. The air smelled the same, earthy, coppery, like old wounds. That night I heard the hum again, stronger, almost like a song this time. Not beautiful, not soft, but ancient. Like it had rhythm and purpose. I went back to the mine. I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe closure. Maybe to find what was left of him. But when I reached the clearing, I froze. The mine was wider, taller, alive. It didn't look like an opening anymore. It looked like a mouth, and I swear to you, it breathed. Hot wind rolled out of it, carrying the scent of blood and rust. And there, at the edge, were 3 sets of footprints. My grandfather's boots, my uncle's hunting tread, and my father's old work shoes, all leading in, but none coming out. I stood at the edge, unable to move. The hum rose to a tremble, then to a roar. Not loud, but deep, bone deep. Like it was inside me, behind my eyes, and then I heard them, all of them, my grandfather, my uncle, my father, calling my name, not pleading, inviting, like they were waiting. I dropped the lantern and ran. I don't know how I made it back. The trail was twisted, different. I blacked out at some point, woke up in my truck, headlights still on. I drove without stopping until I reached the next county line. I haven't returned, but I hear it sometimes. Through the radio, through static in headphones, through the hum of the refrigerator. The same vibration, the same breath, and always, always those 3 voices whispering my name, not asking me to join them, telling me that I already have. Because under the mountain, it waits. And it remembers every footstep that ever passed too close to its mouth. Story 10. I found my name etched into the rocks. You never expect to find your name in a place you've never been, especially not carved into stone on the side of a cliff no map bothers to mark. But I did, and once I saw it, something in my life, something I couldn't explain, began to unravel. It started last fall, during a solo hiking trip in the Cumberland Mountains. I'd been taking these long treks every October, mostly as a way to unplug from everything. Phone, internet, people. Just me, the woods, and the sky. I'd grown up on the edge of Appalachia, so I knew how to respect the land, how to read the weather, how to keep unmarked trails. But this time I didn't stick to the trail. I'd been hiking along the South Ridge when I saw it, an unmarked path veering off to the east, half covered by brush and nearly invisible from the main route. Something about it drew me in. There wasn't a sign, no footprints, just a feeling, a kind of pull, deep in my chest, like gravity bending the wrong way. I followed it. The trail was narrow and steep, winding through dense pine and wet rock slick with moss. Eventually the trees thinned, and I found myself standing before a wall of rock, massive and gray, veined with quartz and lichen. A cliff face maybe 30 feet high, nothing special at first glance. But as I stepped closer, I saw something that made me stop cold. There were names, dozens of them, etched crudely into the stone. Some shallow, some deep, some half erased by time. Most were unfamiliar, but one near the center made my knees lock. Benjamin Clark, 2023. That's my name. And that was the current year. I stared at it for what felt like hours. I hadn't told anyone I was coming here. Not the location, not the timing. This spot wasn't on any maps, and I had never been here before, and yet, there it was, my name, not scratched recently. The edges were worn, dusted with age and moss, like it had been there for years, decades maybe. I reached out and touched it. The moment my fingers grazed the carving, a gust of cold wind came from nowhere, sharp and sudden, like a breath from inside the mountain. The trees groaned. Somewhere behind me, a branch snapped, loud and unnatural. I turned, expecting to see someone. But the trail was empty. The forest had gone completely still, no birds, no bugs. Just silence. I backed away slowly, heart pounding, and started down the slope. My breath came fast, but the air felt thick, hard to pull in. As I made it back to the main trail, the sound returned. Wind through the leaves, the distant call of a crow. But nothing felt normal after that. That night I stayed at a ranger outpost. Couldn't sleep. My thoughts kept circling that stone, that name. My name, why was it there? Who carved it? Was it a prank? A coincidence? But the deeper part of me, the older part, knew it wasn't a prank. It was a warning. When I got back home, I started researching. Old cartography records, geological surveys, anything that mentioned carvings in the southern Cumberland Ridge. I found almost nothing. That area, it turns out, has a name that no one puts on modern maps: Echo's Spine. One archive from the 1880s described it as a cursed stretch of granite, where names appear before their bearers vanish. The writer, a Baptist missionary, recorded seeing his own brother's name carved into the cliff. That man vanished 3 days later. I found more stories. Buried, unverified, a hiker named Darrell Pettis in 1974. A local woman, Marlene James, in 1932. Their names each etched into the same stone days or weeks before they disappeared, never to be seen again. They all had one thing in common. Each had seen their name before something unnatural began following them. I told myself I wouldn't go back, that I'd forget about it, pretend it didn't happen. But the dreams started. Dark forests, the sound of stone being chipped. My name whispered again and again from the trees. Once I woke up with dirt on my hands. No memory of leaving the house. Just a dull ache in my fingers and the taste of iron in my mouth. Then came the knocking. 3 knocks just before dawn. Not at the door, from underneath the floorboards, every night, always 3. My dog stopped barking. Then she stopped eating. She stared at the same corner of the room until one morning I found her curled up, cold, with a look on her face like she'd seen something far too old to understand. I kept seeing that name. In dreams, in reflections. Once in condensation on the bathroom mirror. Benjamin Clark, 2023. No matter how I tried to ignore it, something had shifted. I felt watched. I stopped answering my phone. Stopped checking the mail. The world outside felt thinner. Like if I walked too far in any direction, I'd step through the trees and find myself back at the stone wall, back where my name had been waiting. I returned one last time. I had to. I told myself I'd destroy the carving. Maybe that would break whatever this was. I brought a chisel, a hammer, a satchel of salt and iron nails, everything my grandmother used to talk about when warning me how to break mountain things. But when I reached the cliff, my name was gone, not erased, moved. It now sat higher, deeper, carved into a cleaner portion of the rock, right in the center. The edges were fresh. The date had changed. Benjamin Clark, 2025, 2 years in the future. My blood ran cold. I looked around, heart racing, and that's when I saw them. Not people. Not spirits. Just shapes, faint outlines in the trees, watching, waiting. I couldn't move. My legs wouldn't work. It was like the stone had nailed me in place. One of the shapes raised a hand and pointed toward the cliff. Not the name, the space beneath it. There, carved into the rock with the same rough precision, were 3 new words, already chosen, waiting. I left everything there. The chisel, the bag, my journal. I haven't returned since. But now I understand. The mountain doesn't hunt, it doesn't chase, it marks. And once you've been carved into its skin, it waits just long enough to let you think you're safe. And when the year comes due, the stone remembers. Even if you've tried to forget, I've told you everything I can. The trails, the cabins, the children, the voices. These stories weren't fiction. They weren't campfire tales or twisted dreams. They happened. They are happening. In the hollows. In the quiet between trees. In the silence after dark when even the wind holds its breath. You might be tempted to write them off as coincidence, as folklore. But there's something older than truth in these hills. Something older than memory. And if you've watched this far, you've already stepped too close. You've heard the names. You've seen the patterns. Some of us are marked. Some of us are called. And the land, this ancient breathing thing we think of as earth and stone, it doesn't forget. It keeps what it's owed, sometimes slowly, sometimes all at once, but it always comes to collect. I don't know why I was spared. Maybe I haven't been. Maybe this recording, this confession is just the mountain's way of finishing the loop. A way to reach someone else because that's how it spreads. Not with blood, with attention, with a name spoken too often, with a story listened to too closely. So if your lights flicker tonight, If you hear footsteps outside your door or a knock under your floorboards at 3:07 a.m., don't open it. Don't follow the voice. Don't look into the trees. Because now, you've heard the mountain's breath and it's already watching you.